Jennifer Cashmore was the member for Coles from 1977 to 1993 on her retirement. That seat is now the one that I have the honour to represent. Jennifer Cashmore was my local MP growing up, and I have some reflections on her. I'll do my best not to repeat the words that others have said. There's a couple of places where it'll be difficult. But I particularly want to talk about, rather than the list of her legacies, which is significant but have been well covered by the Premier, the Leader of the Opposition, the Deputy Premier and a couple of others to come. I want to talk a little about the person that was a privilege to know her just a little bit as I did, but also the particular and almost unique way in which I think her legacy can continue to inspire us all in a different way to some of those other people of great achievement, similar to the level of achievement as she might have had, but there was a uniqueness about her. I was introduced to Jennifer Cashmore by Lenore Jones, Lenore Triplow as she was formerly, a colleague of mine in Trish Worth's office for 2 years, in late 1999. Lenore was Jennifer's first electorate secretary in 1977. There was no electorate office at the time. She was working in Parliament House for 6 months. And then she was her final one from 1989 to 1993. Her book, A Chance in Life, was dedicated to Lenore, along with Pam Atwood and Bernadette Karukin, loyal staff members and supporters. Pam was the secretary of the Coles SEC throughout almost the entire period of the 16 years that Jennifer Adamson and then Jennifer Cashmore was in the Parliament. And they remained friends for life. Pam lived just down the road from the street from each other in Jennifer's later years. Coming full circle, another electorate secretary of Jennifer's, Lynn Byrne, helped me establish my electorate office 33 years later, and she would often remember Jennifer's time and reflect on the way in which things had changed. Lenore told me a story this morning about what Jennifer described as her very first achievement, helping somebody in the first week of her being elected to the Parliament. A lady had become widowed and had received a letter from Telecom about her phone account. There was no compassion in the writing, no acknowledgement of her grief. Jennifer was appalled and took up her case with Telecom immediately, knowing that while the standard words in a formal letter might be a small thing, its impact on a great many people at a difficult time in life was nevertheless very important and hurtful in the way that it played out. Telecom agreed to change the wording in the letter. Lenore remembers Jennifer standing in the office with folded arms, being pleased that she'd been able to have a positive impact in 1977, and there would be many more to come. Lenore wrote, I ensured, in reflection on her time as electorate secretary, I ensured there was a small vase of flowers on Jennifer's office desk at all times, usually roses or camellias, which I knew she appreciated. I remember once sitting at her desk taking dictation when a couple of rose petals fell onto the desk. I picked them up to discard, only to be told to leave them where they were, as Jennifer liked seeing nature at work. Some of those who have worked with Jennifer have reflected to me that she had a capacity to work with people and take their feelings into account as she was dealing with them. Never made people uncomfortable. She just had a way of working with people. The reason Lenore introduced us was in my role as Young Liberal President. After David Tonkin passed away, around 25 years ago now, we wanted to establish a memorial dinner with an address that would give young people involved in politics the opportunity to hear from a substantial political figure, but who particularly would encourage them to be thoughtful and philosophical and principled in their political life. Jennifer, who also happened to be very close to David Tonkin, who served in his cabinet as Minister for Health and Tourism, was the perfect choice. She gave that first address in February 2000. It was thoughtful, philosophical and principled. It was poetic, even in the quality of its writing. Last Tuesday, in the sittings late at night, I read that speech into the Hansard for the record, as I don't believe it's been published anywhere else, and it still bears reading for its insight into issues that confronted her then, 24 years ago, and remain relevant now. Issues for which her advocacy was well known, including the relationship between humans and the earth and our natural environment, but also, and I'm quoting, the emergence of global corporations with powers greater than those of sovereign states, the development of information technology that surpasses any single previous invention in its power to revolutionise economic, political and social ideas and practice, I think the Deputy Premier described her as far-sighted. Jennifer was a deep thinker. She was a philosophical thinker. She was a philosophical writer. The power of her written work is quite extraordinary. In fact, the remarkable children who she had spoke about this at her funeral, the letters that she would write every week. But we also have the benefit of the published works. She wrote, obviously there's many speeches in Hansard, and I apologise to the House, I have some that I wish to share. But she wrote a book of essays, amongst other writings, called A Chance in Life. I referenced it before. I encourage people to get a copy of, or at least borrow it from the library. It reflects on a range of things. She writes about liberalism. Attitude to power is the main characteristic which distinguishes liberalism from other political philosophies. The goal of decentralising power has been the driving force behind the evolution of liberalism, propelling us forward from the days of absolute rulers, whether of church, state, industry or commerce. If you accept the inherent worth and dignity of the individual, you must also accept that no single group or individual should exercise absolute power over any other. To subordinate the legitimate interests of individuals is to deny the concepts of human dignity and liberty. She wrote about environmentalism, she wrote about economic projects, she wrote about the multifunction polis, which is worth reading for students of South Australian history. She wrote about libraries, she wrote about palliative care. She wrote about the Wilpena development. The Deputy Premier would be pleased to know that in the book, which is not currently in the Parliamentary Library because one of our colleagues clearly has borrowed it, there is a copy of the poem that she wrote that inspired the John Schumann song If I Close My Eyes, which he sang so beautifully at the funeral last week. She wrote about her experiences as a woman in Parliament. We now use words like trailblazer, but she spoke with precise, devastating insight that could only come from the experience of having been the third woman elected to this House, the second female minister, a woman elected to this House at a time when she was the only woman in this House. Joyce Steele, Molly Byrne had retired. Jennifer was here alone. She spoke to me, I remember one of our early conversations about the lack of female toilets in this building, particularly in proximity to this chamber, where for a period of time it was Joyce and Molly and then later her. Thankfully, that situation has obviously improved. She wrote one of the other topics, women's voices, in the book of essays I described. She talked about her rules in politics, and one of the particular rules that she had was, if at first you don't succeed, keep trying. She talked about one of her issues, the issues of toilets in national parks, not receiving due attention. When frequent complaints, she wrote about the deplorable when frequent complaints about the deplorable state of toilet facilities in national parks brought no response, I decided direct action was the best course. One quiet Sunday, having first alerted the news services, I took a mop, bucket and broom to Windy Point Conservation Park. Television film and photographs of a politician scrubbing out the lavatories soon got the message across. Others have spoken about the bulldozer threat at Wilpena, which was very effective. The leader alluded to the Radiation Protection and Control Act, and it was this topic in particular that I also wanted to bring to members' attention, because when she came to speak to the Morialta SEC, probably 2011 or 2012, I remember Max Amber introducing her that night as they'd worked together. He at that stage was a local councillor and then mayor. She spent a bit of time talking about the experience of that debate, which was so critical in allowing the development of Olympic Dam. The leader mentioned it as an all-night sitting, but I thought that I would read the 9 hours of Hansard that comprised. I didn't actually, I skipped it. But she gave the second reading speech on the 3rd of March 1982, and 2 weeks later the broader debate took place. And the second reading went for some time at the dinner break. And as now, the House rose at 6 o'clock to return at 7:30. The debate continued with Jennifer Adamson, as was then, Jennifer Cashmore, sitting in the ministerial seat from 7:30 p.m. until 3:16 a.m. without being able to go for a toilet break, not that there was a toilet nearby, as I understand. For 7 hours and 46 minutes, careful stewardship throughout the third reading of that debate, respectfully, forcefully, intelligently presenting the case that led to the passage of the bill, that bill which was so important for the establishment of the mine that's so important for our economic underpinnings today. The revenue from that mine, the treasurers and shadow treasurers would be familiar with how important that is. I thought it worth reflecting after 3 in the morning, Jennifer Adamson, as is listed in the Hansard, concluded the debate. It's been abundantly clear throughout the debate that the opposition is approaching the question of radiation control with a double standard, which I believe is very sad indeed. The questions relating to the control of medical, industrial or scientific radiation have passed virtually with no comment and have been glossed over. The questions relating to radiation safety in regard to uranium mining have been pursued relentlessly and have been distorted in the way in which I have just described, in an effort, I believe, to cast doubts in the public mind on the nature of the safeguards that the government is implementing under this legislation. I repeat what was said in the second reading explanation and throughout the debate, namely that this is the most all-embracing legislation that has been enacted in Australia. It seeks to ensure that doctors observe the same law as miners and that miners observe the same law as doctors. The law is framed to ensure the maximum protection of the individual and the environment. I'm very confident that this is what will occur. Jennifer Cashmore, it has been noted, was critical in outlining some of the issues relating to the State Bank early on before others would listen. I just wanted to touch on the debate in February 1991, during which she was named. And I'm quoting from Rex Jory's report at the time. Ms Cashmore was suspended at 2:54 p.m. until the next sitting of Parliament after shouting across the chamber at Mr Bannon, "You are dishonest." As Ms Cashmore left the chamber, she bowed respectfully to Mr Peterson, the Speaker, and in an unprecedented outburst shouted to Mr Bannon, "You have sent this state bankrupt and you know it." Members, including Mr Bannon, appeared stunned as she left the chamber. On the footpath outside Parliament, Ms Cashmore said the blame for the $1 billion bank loss, which is what the loss was understood to be at the time of the article, it turned out to be more, rested with Mr Bannon as Premier and Treasurer and he should resign. She went on to say, I've not been able to remain silent after 2 years of questioning and the Premier evading the issue. If I, as a private member of Parliament, was able to see what was coming to the State Bank and the Premier, with all of the resources of the Treasury and the Board of the Bank and the public service at his disposal could not see, then I believe he should be called to account. Her life, her legacy is an inspiration for us to always do better, to always be questioning. As I said, she was my local MP growing up, and I met her in about 2000. When I ran for pre-selection in 2008 and was successful, she was kind enough to write me a letter and offer me a small donation early in my campaign. She gave me the opportunity to come and visit her. And after I was elected, I was honoured that she bestowed on me the champagne glasses that she had purchased when she became the member for Coles in 1977, noting that it was important to sometimes host people at one's house for engagements, one's local members, and she thought that being a young man of about 31 years old, it was possible I didn't have a suitable collection of champagne glasses, and at her stage she was using them less. So I was honoured to have that. She also gave me some books that Stuart Coburn, her husband, her late husband by then, had been given by Sir Robert Menzies and his family, reflecting on his time working with Sir Robert. And she gave them to me because she thought that I might be able to use them as auction items at fundraisers. I'll be honest, I didn't. I've still got them, and I treasure them greatly. The tribute by Sir Robert Menzies to Winston Churchill in particular I appreciate, and she was very encouraging of those who reflected on philosophy and the traditions of our political parties, but in life as well. Jo Scalzi is with us today. Jo was the member for Hartley for 1993 to 2006. In Jo's maiden speech, Jo said to me recently that Jennifer Cashmore was a great South Australian and a great Liberal, and Jo said that he joined the Liberal Party because of her. In his maiden speech, he wrote, "In this centenary celebration of women's suffrage, the contribution made to this state by the Honourable Jennifer Cashmore must be praised. There is no doubt she has successfully represented her electorate as well as South Australia. We will all suffer a great loss now that she has retired from Parliament. Jennifer Cashmore has taught us that you can have fire in your belly and seek the truth without being dressed in tattered clothing. She has shown us over the years you can care for the environment without falling victim to the stereotype. I believe she has played an important role in helping to bridge the forces of development in the environmental movement, for ultimately it is in the community's interests and the interests of the future that they work together." The Premier raised that at the funeral we heard from her children and indeed the Minister, who was Jennifer's Minister, about her experience on the steps of Parliament House. I arrived home late at night on the 12th of April to a voicemail from Jennifer asking me to call whatever time I got home, and it was after 11. We'd been at the Marquet Club for a fundraiser, and she was up and encouraged. She was eager to come to the demonstration at the museum the following morning. She was particularly concerned about the status of some of the research staff who she knew personally, whose work she considered to be tremendously important from an anthropological point of view as well as an environmental point of view. She was distressed at the idea that if she came to Parliament House and wasn't able to access the building, then that might make it very difficult for her. So she wanted to know if I could help. I was in a position, fortunately, that we could give her a lift. Conscious, obviously, of the position of her daughter, Her Excellency, Jennifer didn't want to share that with Her Excellency prior to the event, and that was suitable, but I knew that Jennifer was somebody of fierce passion. The Deputy Premier described her sharp intelligence, even although the frailty of her illness in late life made physically it more difficult. But her sharp intelligence was insightful and incisive to the end. And the discussion we had that night and the following morning in the car on the way to and from the demonstration was something that was a privilege for me to spend that time with her at that moment. When we were on the steps before the rally, she said that it was the first time she'd been back here in 15 years. It was obviously a level of difficulty for her to get here, but she felt it was important that she present her support to that. Of the people, and there were about 900 or so on the steps, maybe 1,000, I think there were 800 signatures collected on the petition, but I don't want to assume that everybody signed it that day. Many of them, I suspect, would remember Jennifer from her time in Parliament. Many would not. But to hear 1,000 people applauding as one, and a fairly diverse group of people, as you might imagine at that group, to hear that Jennifer was in attendance was something special, and I'm very pleased that Jennifer was able to hear that acknowledgement of her continued activism, her continued role in public life by such a large group of people just 2 months ago. Jennifer concluded her book, well, not her only book, but the book that I've been quoting from, A Chance in Life, with her personal credo, and I'll share it because I think it bears all of our reflection. She said, "As a Member of Parliament, I believe it is my responsibility to try as often as possible to say what other people are thinking, but perhaps not expressing, so that those I represent feel they have a voice. Another obligation, more difficult by far to fulfill, is actually to make people think. We need to see ourselves not only as individuals, but as a very important part of society. When we do that, we are forced to think about the relationship between thought and action, action and reaction. We are forced to think not just about our own lives, but about the lives of others we depend on and who depend on us, our families, our employers, our colleagues, our country. In other words, we are forced to think politically. The more people can think politically, the more power they have to influence their future in ways of their own choosing." We have lost a substantial South Australian, but she leaves a legacy not just in her achievements, which have been profound, long-lasting and dramatic in their significance for South Australians, but also that written legacy, that opportunity for us to reflect on her words, her beautiful thoughts, and the way in which she should continue to inspire us to be better people and better parliamentarians and better in our service to the state. So let us all strive to make even a small portion of the impact that she had. I offer my most sincere condolences to all the family and all those who loved her.